So if you walked up to like 100 people on the street right now
Yeah.
and just asked a very simple question,
Sure.
something like who falls in love faster,
Yeah.
men or women? I mean, almost every single person would give you the exact same answer.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Because about 85% of society just assumes that women fall in love first.
Okay.
We have this entire pop culture apparatus, you know, romantic comedies, novels, dating advice.
Right, the whole industry.
Exactly. It's all built around the idea that women are this hyper-romantic sex,
Yeah.
basically desperately trying to lock down these emotionally detached men.
Yeah, that is the standard narrative.
But when social psychologists actually sat down and, measured real-world relationships, they found something that just completely incinerates that stereotype.
It really does. It's wild.
Men don't just express love first.
Yeah.
The data says they start thinking about saying, I love you a full 42 days earlier than women do.
Right.
A month and a half.
Yeah, it is a phenomenal disconnect between our cultural mythology and, well, our actual psychological reality.
It really is.
And it perfectly illustrates why relying on intuition or poetry or Hollywood to understand human affection is so deeply flawed.
Yeah, which is exactly why we are here. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we are unpacking a massive stack of social psychology research, and we're really anchoring our conversation around Beverly Fair's incredibly comprehensive work, Everyday Conceptions of Love.
It's such a foundational piece of literature.
It is. Because for centuries, love was exclusively the domain of, philosophers and poets. If you wanted to understand human connection, you didn't look at data, you went to Shakespeare.
Right, you read a sonnet.
Exactly. We were actually looking at a quote earlier from a researcher named Knox, writing back in 1970, I think.
Yes, 1970.
Right. And he flat out stated that scientific research on love was completely non-existent at that point. Like, everyone had an opinion, but there was absolute zero empirical data.
Yeah, the scientific community essentially treated love as if it were magic.
Like alchemy or something.
Exactly. The implicit assumption was that this emotion was just too ethereal, too mysterious, and frankly, too subjective to ever be captured on a spreadsheet or measured with a psychometric scale.
Right.
It was viewed as an academic untouchable.
But that has completely changed. I mean, today, we have decades of robust, hard data. We actually know what love is now.
We do.
We know how everyday people define it, how it differs, or actually doesn't differ, across genders and cultures.
Right.
And most importantly, for you listening right now, we know how your specific personal definition of love actually predicts whether your current relationship will survive or ultimately fall apart.
That is the most crucial takeaway.
Yeah, we are basically transitioning from alchemy to chemistry here.
I think that is the perfect framework for this discussion. If you think about historical alchemy, it was full of mysticism, guesswork, and these grand romantic ideas about turning lead into gold through some hidden magical properties.
Right, just throwing things in a pot and hoping.
Yeah, exactly. And that is exactly how humanity viewed love for most of its history. But chemistry isn't about magic.
No, it's methodical.
Chemistry is the rigorous process of breaking matter down into its fundamental empirical elements. It's about understanding precisely how atoms bond, why certain mixtures are incredibly volatile and explosive, and why other molecular structures are rock solid and stable.
And today, we are looking at the literal chemistry of human affection.
We really are.
So before we put this emotion under the microscope, I want to ask you, the listener, a question. Right now, in your own head, how do you define love?
It's a hard question to answer on the spot.
It is. But if I handed you a pen and paper right now, what are the mandatory requirements for you to look at a relationship and say, yes, that is love?
Right. What's on your checklist?
Exactly. Just hold on to whatever definition you just came up with. Because as we walk through this data today, there's a very good chance you're going to realize your own subconscious definition is completely different from what you just consciously thought of.
Oh, almost certainly. And to understand how we finally cracked that code, we have to look back at the early 1970s.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So this is the era when social psychologists finally decided they were going to tackle this topic. But they ran into an immediate, massive roadblock.
Which was?
Well, in the scientific method, if you cannot define your variable, you cannot measure it. And if you cannot measure it, you cannot test it.
Right. You can't run a 10-year longitudinal study on marriage success if you don't even have a standardized definition of the emotion keeping the marriage together in the first place.
Exactly. So researchers had to draw some lines in the sand early on. Zick Rubin in 1970 was one of the first trailblazers here.
And what was his big breakthrough?
His major contribution to the field was proving, empirically, the difference between love and liking.
which, on the surface sounds almost insulting to our intelligence.
I know, it sounds obvious.
Right, like, of course, love and liking are different. But scientifically, that just wasn't established yet, right? People just assumed love was just, well, liking someone a whole lot.
That was the prevailing assumption, yeah. But Rubin conceptualized love as an entirely different psychological construct. He defined love as an attitude.
Okay, an attitude.
Right, a specific internal state that predisposes you to think, feel, and act in very particular ways toward another human being.
Got it.
And he broke this attitude of love down into 3 core measurable components: intimacy, need or attachment, and caring.
Okay.
Liking, conversely, was defined merely as a positive evaluation.
So help me understand the difference between an attitude and an evaluation in this specific context, because they sound kind of similar.
Well, an evaluation is really a judgment of merit. So you might evaluate a colleague and say, I like them because they are highly competent, they are respectful, and they communicate well.
Okay, so it's logic-based.
Exactly. That is a positive evaluation based on traits. But love the attitude is not necessarily tied to a logical evaluation of traits at all.
Right, because we've all loved people who are being terrible.
Exactly. You can deeply love someone who is currently being entirely incompetent or difficult.
That makes so much sense. You like your accountant because they are good at math.
Yeah,
You love your spouse because of this much deeper internal drive.
precisely.
And I noticed in the research that Rubin's 3 components, intimacy, need, and caring, they didn't actually hold equal weight over time as researchers looked deeper into it.
No, they didn't.
Because by the 1980s, researchers like Steck and his colleagues actually found that everyday people view caring as far more indicative of true love than need.
And this is a crucial psychological distinction.
How so?
Well, think about the language of need. If someone says to you, I desperately need you, the psychological undercurrent there can actually be quite toxic.
Yeah, it feels heavy.
It centers on dependency, which is essentially a self-serving mechanism. It's about what the other person provides for you.
Oh, interesting. So need is selfish.
Often, yes. But caring flips the vector entirely. Caring is an altruistic investment in the well-being of the other person.
It's outward facing.
Exactly. Steck's research showed that the human brain innately recognizes that true affection must contain that outward-facing altruism.
Okay, so Rubin lays this groundwork.
Yeah.
And then we get Elman Burscheid and Elaine Hatfield in 1974.
Yes, a massive leap forward.
And they introduced a framework that I think most people intuitively recognize today. They argued that love isn't just a monolith, it's actually divided into 2 distinct biological and psychological categories.
Right.
Passionate love and companionate love.
The passionate-companionate dichotomy is arguably the most influential paradigm in all of relationship science.
I mean, it's everywhere.
It really is. They defined passionate love as a state of intense longing for union with another. It is wildly emotional.
The honeymoon phase.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's characterized by extreme physiological arousal, your heart racing, your palms sweating, the proverbial butterflies in your stomach.
Yeah.
It is deeply tied to sexual attraction and infatuation.
It's the fireworks. It's that first 6 months of a relationship where you just can't stop thinking about the other person.
Right.
And then companionate love is basically the absolute opposite of fireworks.
Completely different mechanism.
They defined it as friendly affection and deep attachment. It's that slow burn emotion built on trust, honesty, respect, and mutual history.
Yes.
It's what you feel for a spouse of 20 years, but it's also what you feel for your closest friends or your family members.
Exactly. And what Burscheid and Hatfield did here was give the field a taxonomy. And once you have a taxonomy in science, the academic floodgates just open.
And boy, did they open.
Throughout the 1980s, there was an absolute explosion of scientific models trying to map every single microscopic variation of human affection.
This is where I started getting a bit dizzy reading through the sources, honestly. It felt like researchers were trying to invent the periodic table of romance.
That's a great way to put it.
You have Hendrick and Hendrick in 1986 building on John Lee's earlier work, and they came up with these 6 different love styles using all this Greek terminology.
Yes, the 6-style typology. You have eros, which is the intensely passionate, romantic, physical love.
Okay.
Storge, which is friendship-based, companionate love that grows slowly over time. Agape, which is entirely selfless, altruistic, giving love.
So those are the healthy ones, generally.
Usually, yes. And then they categorize the more maladaptive styles.
Right, the toxic ones. Ludus, which is game-playing love where commitment is avoided, deception is super common.
Great to struck that.
Mania, which is obsessive, deeply dependent, and jealous. And then pragma, which is a highly practical, almost algorithmic approach to finding a partner with the right resume.
Like checking boxes on a list.
So,
And concurrent with that typology, you had Robert Sternberg developing his incredibly famous triangular theory of love.
oh, the triangle.
Yes. Sternberg hypothesized that love is built on three vertices: passion, intimacy, and decision or commitment. He theorized that by mathematically combining these three elements in different ways, you could map out 8 distinct human experiences.
So if you have high intimacy and high commitment, but absolutely zero passion, Sternberg says you have companionate love.
Exactly.
But if you have all three firing on all cylinders, passion, intimacy, commitment, you have consummate love.
Right. And if you only have passion, well, it's just infatuation.
Got it.
And simultaneously with all this, researchers like Hazan and Shaver were approaching love through an entirely different lens: developmental psychology.
Right, looking at babies.
Yes. They applied John Bowlby's infant attachment theory to adult romance. They argued that the way a baby attaches to its mother, whether that attachment is secure, anxious, ambivalent, or avoidant, literally wires the brain's blueprint for how that person will experience romantic love decades later.
That is fascinating. So we have triangles, we have Greek typologies, we have infant attachment
It
patterns.
was a very busy decade for theory.
And then Burchard comes back years later and tries to synthesize all of this chaos into what she calls the quadrumvirate model.
Yes.
Basically, she made 4 massive buckets that subsume every other theory: romantic love, companionate love, compassionate love, and attachment love.
Burchard's quadrumvirate model is brilliant because it doesn't just categorize the feeling, it maps the feeling to its evolutionary trigger.
What do you mean by trigger?
In psychology, we call these antecedents. She argued that you can't truly understand the type of love without looking at the environmental stimulus that activates it in the brain.
Oh, I see. So the antecedent, the trigger for passionate love is physical attraction and sexual desire.
Exactly.
You see someone, your biology reacts, passion is activated. The trigger for companionate love is proximity and similarity.
Right. You work in the same office, you realize you share the same values. The repeated exposure over time activates friendship.
What about compassionate love? Because that sounds close to companionate, but it's different.
Compassionate love is triggered by perceiving the other person in distress. It is the communal altruistic drive to alleviate suffering. When you see your partner hurting, the emotion that compels you to care for them isn't passion, and it isn't just friendship, it is a distinct, compassionate drive.
Okay. And finally, attachment love.
That is triggered by a threatening situation.
Right.
When a person feels fear, vulnerability, or some environmental threat, their psychological system looks for a primary figure to provide a safe haven. That specific bond is attachment love.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there because I have to confess something here.
Go for it.
I'm looking at all these triangles, all the Greek words, the 4 rigid buckets, the environmental triggers.
Yeah.
And while it all sounds incredibly smart, it also feels completely detached from human reality.
I can see why you'd say that.
I mean, I cannot imagine a human being experiencing the messy, chaotic, completely irrational feeling of love and successfully organizing it into a tidy spreadsheet in their head. Do we actually silo our emotions this cleanly? Because it feels to me like scientists are overcomplicating something that, my grandmother intrinsically understands without needing a Venn diagram.
That is a phenomenal critique, and honestly, it is exactly the crisis the field eventually ran into.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
you are asking, is this taxonomy reflecting psychological reality, or is it just an academic exercise?
Exactly.
And the statistical data actually supports your skepticism. When researchers ran massive meta-analyses like Graham did in 2011, they took all these different scales, all these separate typologies, and fed the participant data into complex factor analysis models.
And what happens when you crunch the numbers? Do the buckets hold up?
The neat little boxes collapse entirely. Graham found that when people take these varied tests, the results overwhelmingly load onto a single massive general factor.
Okay.
Participants do not strictly compartmentalize eros from storage from agape in real time. In the human mind, they just blur together into a singular, holistic experience of love.
So the scientific spreadsheet is basically a myth.
It is a theoretical construct. It's highly useful for academic discussion, but it is not an accurate map of human cognitive architecture.
Okay, so if the rigid models fail when we test actual people, how do regular human beings organize this concept in their minds?
Good question.
Because we clearly do have a system. I know the feeling I have for my wife is different from the feeling I have for my best friend, which is completely different from how I feel about my dog.
Oh, right, absolutely.
I am categorizing them somehow, even if I'm not using Greek typologies to do it.
To understand the actual architecture of the everyday mind, we have to borrow a massive breakthrough from cognitive psychology.
Let's do it.
In the 1970s, a researcher named Eleanor Rosch completely revolutionized how we understand language and categorization with something called the prototype approach.
Okay, can you break down what cognitive psychology was doing before Rush? Like, why was her idea such a massive breakthrough?
Well, before Rosch, science operated on the classical Aristotelian view of categorization.
Which means,
The belief was that concepts had strict, definitive boundaries based on a checklist of necessary and sufficient conditions.
okay, give me an example.
For example, to be categorized as a triangle, an object must have exactly 3 straight sides and internal angles adding up to 180 degrees. If it lacks even one of those features, it is fundamentally not a triangle.
It's binary. You are either in the club or you are out.
Precisely. And psychologists assumed the human brain categorized natural language words we use every day, like bird or furniture, or love, using that exact same strict checklist approach.
But that's not how we talk.
Exactly. Rosch proved that natural concepts do not have rigid boundaries. They do not have definitive checklists. Instead, our brains organize the world around best examples, which she called prototypes.
I love the classic example I used to explain this. Let's talk about fruit.
Right, the fruit study. If I ask you or anyone listening right now to quickly name a fruit, your brain is immediately going to generate the word apple or orange.
Yeah, instantly.
You are statistically incredibly unlikely to say avocado, tomato, or pumpkin.
Even though, botanically speaking, an avocado is 100% a fruit.
Right.
It has a seed. It fits the scientific checklist perfectly.
But cognitive categorization doesn't care about botanical checklists. In the human mind, an apple represents the absolute center of the fruit category. It is the prototype.
Because it fits the vibe better.
Right. It has all the features we heavily associate with the concept. It's sweet, it's round, it grows on a tree. An avocado, on the other hand, is a non-prototypical fruit.
It's weird fruit.
Yes. It exists on the blurry, fuzzy outer edge of the category. It's technically in the club, but it's not a good representative of the club.
So the boundary isn't a hard line. It's a gradient.
Yeah.
You have central prototypical examples, and you have peripheral weird examples.
Exactly.
And Beverly Fair, the researcher whose work we are diving into today, looked at Rosch's fruit studies and asked a brilliant question. Does our brain do the exact same thing with an abstract, highly emotional concept like love?
Yes. Fair theorized that love isn't a strict checklist. It's a gradient. So she ran a series of studies asking everyday people to simply list different types of love, and then she had a second group rate how typical those types were of the overall concept of love.
And the results just completely inverted everything pop culture tells us.
Entirely.
This is the part that just blew my mind reading the notes.
Yeah.
The absolute prototypes of love, the apples of the love category, the examples that everyday people rated as the truest, clearest, most central representations of the emotion were all companionate forms of love.
Every single one.
Maternal love, familial love, deep friendship. That was the core.
And where did passionate love land?
Romantic love, sexual love, infatuation, they were rated as non-prototypical.
They are the avocados.
Yes, they are the avocados of love.
The societal disconnect here is just staggering. Every song on the radio, every marketing campaign for Valentine's Day portrays passionate romance as the absolute pinnacle, the defining essence of love.
Right.
Yet when you empirically test the cognitive structure of everyday people, passion is shoved out to the periphery. The core of human affection is companionate.
And Fair didn't just stop at categorizing the types of love, right? She drilled down into the specific features.
Yes, the micro level.
She asked people to list the actual characteristics of love, generating a list of 68 distinct features. Then she asked people to rate how central those features were.
And the results were overwhelmingly consistent. The highest rated features, the absolute core of the prototype, were honesty, trust, caring, respect, and loyalty.
And the lowest rated features, the ones people said were on the blurry outer edge of love.
Dependency, sexual passion, physical attraction, and physiological symptoms like an increased heart rate.
So the fireworks are peripheral.
Exactly.
But how do we know people aren't just giving the socially acceptable answer here?
What do you mean?
Well, maybe I say trust is more important than lust because I want the researcher to think I'm a good person. Like, how did Fair prove this is actually how the brain is wired, and not just people lying on a survey?
That is the genius of her methodology. She didn't just rely on self-reported ratings. She used cognitive processing metrics to measure the subconscious architecture of the brain.
Oh, wow.
One method she used was analyzing natural language hedges.
Okay, explain what a linguistic hedge is for us.
In English, we use modifier phrases like sort of or technically to hedge a statement when something is on the periphery of a category.
Right.
So it makes perfect linguistic sense to say a tomato is sort of a fruit.
There's an avocado situation.
Exactly. But it breaks the logical rules of language to say an apple is sort of a fruit. An apple just is a fruit.
Right, because you don't need to hedge the prototype.
Exactly. So Fair applied this to the 68 features of love. She found that it sounds completely natural to human ears to hedge a non-prototypical feature.
Like what?
You can easily say, Pat is sort of dependent on Chris, or Pat is sort of physically attracted to Chris.
Yeah, that sounds totally normal.
But if you attempt to hedge the prototypical central features, the brain registers it as nonsensical. It sounds utterly bizarre to say Pat sort of trusts Chris, or Pat sort of is honest with Chris.
Because trust is the center.
Yes.
You either have the core or you don't. You can't sort of have the foundation.
Exactly. And she backed this linguistic data up with actual reaction time studies, too.
Reaction time.
Yes. In cognitive psychology, reaction time is the ultimate lie detector. The closer a concept is to the prototype, the faster the brain retrieves it from memory.
So it's measured in milliseconds.
Yes.
Hmm.
When Fair put participants in front of a computer screen and flashed different types of love, asking them to press a button if it fit the category, people were physically, measurably faster to hit the button for companionate features like maternal love than they were for infatuation or sexual passion.
That is wild.
Their neural pathways literally processed companionate traits as love faster.
It's undeniable data. But, you know, there's an obvious counter-argument here that I was thinking about. You might say, sure, if you ask people about love, generally, they think about their mom or their best friend. But what if you isolate the research? What if you force people to define romantic love specifically? I assume the avocados would finally become the apples in that scenario.
That is exactly what researchers like Regan in 1998, Keto in 2016, and Manoharan and DeMunk in 2017 decided to test. They replicated Fair's methodology, but constrained the category specifically to romantic love, and in some studies even constrained it just to the concept of passion.
And what happened?
The findings are incredibly counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Even when participants are explicitly instructed to define romantic love, they still list trust, honesty, caring, and friendship as the most central prototypical features.
Wait, really? Even for just romantic love?
Yes. Sexual attraction and butterflies move up slightly, but they never overtake the companionate core.
That's crazy.
Even when asked to define passion itself, everyday people rated intimacy, happiness, and loyalty higher than lust.
What this tells us about the human condition is just profound.
It really is.
In the cognitive architecture of our minds, a romantic relationship is, first and foremost, a relationship.
Yes.
And relationships fundamentally require trust and honesty to function.
The less prototypical features,
Mhm.
the sexual attraction, the physiological arousal, those do not define the emotion of love. They act as diagnostic indicators.
What do you mean by diagnostic indicators?
They are the specific signals that tell your brain which flavor of love you are currently experiencing. The trust and caring tell you that love is present. The addition of sexual attraction is just the diagnostic tool that says, this specific instance of love is romantic.
Let's use an analogy here, because I'm thinking about technology like a computer system.
Okay, I like it.
The companionate traits trust, honesty, loyalty. That is the operating system. It is the core kernel that makes the machine run. If the operating system fails, the entire computer crashes.
Right.
Passion, lust, butterflies,
Ah.
those are the software applications you install on top of the operating
The
system.
user interface.
Yes. Passion is the flashy user interface. It's the app that gets your attention. It's fun to use. It's what you look at every day. But an app cannot run without a stable operating system underneath it.
Exactly.
You can have a romantic software app running, but if it's not built on the foundational code of trust and caring, the system is fundamentally broken.
That is a remarkably accurate analogy for the prototype data. It explains how we categorize concepts in milliseconds.
Okay, but?
But here's the next hurdle. Human relationships do not exist in milliseconds.
Yeah, they don't.
They unfold dynamically over years through conflict, growth, and routine. When we are actively living inside a relationship, we don't consciously rely on cognitive prototypes to navigate our daily lives.
Right, I'm not thinking about apples and avocados when I'm arguing about the dishes.
Exactly. We rely on narratives.
So if the prototype is the subconscious computer code, how do we consciously experience our relationships?
This brings us to alternative frameworks, starting with Robert Sternberg's Love is a Story theory.
And I have to say, of all the theories in the research, this is the one that will make every single person listening suddenly reevaluate their last argument with their partner.
It really puts things in perspective. Sternberg's narrative approach is incredibly compelling. He proposes that human beings do not experience love as a static checklist. We experience it temporally as a narrative arc.
Like a movie.
Exactly. We all walk around with implicit, deeply ingrained theories about how a love story is supposed to unfold.
And where do we get these scripts?
Oh.
Because we don't write them ourselves.
No, we absorb them. We build our implicit stories by observing our parents' marriage. We absorb them from the cultural media we consume, the fairy tales, the movies, the tragedy we see on the news.
Right.
We construct them from our own past traumas and early dating experiences. And the most dangerous part is that we are almost entirely unconscious of the fact that we are reading from a script. We assume our story is just objective reality.
Sternberg identified 26 distinct love stories, and reading through them is like holding up a mirror to society. Let's talk about the adaptive ones first, the scripts that actually help relationships succeed.
The most commonly endorsed stories in the general population are highly functional. You have the travel story, where the underlying thesis is, love is a journey we are taking together. We will encounter roadblocks, we will need to navigate, but we are moving forward as a team.
I like that one.
Another highly adaptive one is the gardening story.
Relationships are plants that need to be continually nurtured, watered, and tended to.
Right. If you ignore the garden, the weeds take over.
And then there's the democratic government story, where the entire narrative revolves around equal power sharing, voting on decisions, and compromise.
Those all sound incredibly healthy.
They do. But then we get to the maladaptive stories, the ones that are statistically less common, but absolutely devastate the people who hold them.
Sternberg identified several highly destructive scripts. For example, the horror story.
The horror story.
In this narrative, a person subconsciously believes that a relationship only becomes authentic or interesting when they are terrorizing or being terrorized by their partner.
Wow.
Peace is viewed as boredom. Conflict and fear are the desired state.
And how does someone even develop a horror story script? Is it just childhood trauma?
Frequently, yes. If a child grows up in an environment where the only attention they received was tied to explosive anger or fear, their developing brain wires those physiological responses to the concept of connection.
That is heartbreaking.
They internalize the script that love is synonymous with terror.
And there are other dark ones too, right?
Yes, the collector's story, where a partner is essentially viewed as an object, a trophy, to fit into some detached overall life scheme.
I need a spouse with this exact degree and this exact look to complete my portfolio.
Exactly. Or the autocratic government story, which is entirely about unilateral domination and control. Or the game story, where love is viewed as a sport to be won, and vulnerability is seen as losing points.
The diagnostic power of Sternberg's framework is just immense. His research consistently shows that relationship longevity and satisfaction are heavily dependent on whether partners share compatible love stories.
Yes, that alignment is everything.
Because if our stories are misaligned, we aren't just disagreeing on a topic, we are existing in two completely different realities. Think about it.
Give us an example.
If my implicit narrative is the gardening story, and we get into a massive argument over finances, my instinct is to sit down, talk about our feelings, pull the weeds, and nurture the relationship back to health.
Right.
But if your narrative is the game story, you view that exact same argument as a competitive match. You are trying to score points, win the debate, and assert dominance.
Exactly.
I'm trying to water a plant, and you're trying to checkmate me. The friction isn't about the money. It's a clash of fundamental realities.
Precisely. You are speaking two completely different narrative languages. Now, Sternberg's stories are one way to view the conscious experience of love. But another fascinating alternative is Myers and Burscheid's social categorization approach.
This study was a masterclass in indirect psychological measurement.
It really was.
I found this study brilliant because they bypassed definitions entirely. They didn't ask anyone, what is love? They just handed participants a piece of paper and said, write down the names of people you love.
And as you would expect, based on the prototype approach, the lists were expansive. Participants wrote down dozens of names. They listed their parents, their siblings, their friends, their mentors, their children.
But then the researchers handed them a second piece of paper and changed one preposition.
Yes.
They asked, write down the names of the people you are in love with. And suddenly, that massive list collapses.
It shrinks dramatically, almost universally, down to a single name, a current romantic partner or a highly desired crush.
And here's the kicker. They asked for a third list. Write down the names of people toward whom you feel sexual attraction.
And that third list overlapped almost entirely with the tiny in love list.
This indirect measurement empirically proves the cognitive categorization we discussed earlier. Love is the broad, overarching companionate category. In love is a highly specific, narrow subcategory that fundamentally requires the addition of the sexual or passionate component.
Exactly. But as we explore these frameworks, we also have to look at the critics. We have Bergner's essentialist approach, which aggressively pushes back against everything we've just discussed about blurry boundaries and prototypes.
Right. Bergner steps in and says, no, Eleanor Rosch is wrong. Love is not an avocado. People actually do hold a strict classical definition with one absolutely necessary feature.
He argues that there is an essential core, and if a relationship lacks this one specific thing, society universally agrees it is not love.
So what is his non-negotiable feature?
Bergner roots his argument in descriptive psychology. He claims that the single, non-negotiable, essential feature of love is investment in the well-being of the other for their own sake.
Not for what they can do for you, but for their own sake.
Exactly. To prove this, Bergner ran studies where he presented participants with complex relationship vignettes. He described a couple who possessed immense passion, incredible physical intimacy, and a stated commitment to stay together.
Okay, sounds like love.
However, the vignette explicitly noted that neither partner cared at all about the other's personal well-being or happiness outside of what it provided for them.
Ah, so they had all the vertices of Sternberg's triangle, but zero altruism.
And when participants read these vignettes, they uniformly rejected the idea that the couple was in love. They viewed it as a linguistic and psychological contradiction.
Interesting.
Bergner successfully argued that without that selfless investment in well-being, the entire concept of love collapses in the human mind.
Which maps perfectly onto the cultural consensus theory developed by Heshmati and our colleagues.
Yes, it ties together nicely.
They wanted to figure out what actually makes people feel loved in their day-to-day lives. They didn't ask about grand theories. They gave people a massive list of true-false scenarios and looked for cultural alignment.
And the consensus was striking. The scenarios that generated the highest agreement across the culture had absolutely nothing to do with grand romantic gestures, expensive gifts, or passionate declarations.
Wow.
The things that universally made people feel loved were grounded in Bergner's concept of investment in well-being.
The top answers were things like someone showing you compassion during a difficult time, a child coming up and snuggling with you,
Beautiful everyday things.
or, and I love this one, your pet being visibly happy to see you when you walk through the door. It's the everyday, mundane manifestations of care.
What is equally fascinating about Heshmati's work is the demographic breakdown of who actually understands this cultural consensus best.
Who is the most tuned in to what love really means?
Women, individuals who score high on the psychological personality trait of agreeableness, and people who are currently in active relationships.
Makes sense.
Those groups are statistically the most knowledgeable about what culturally constitutes the feeling of love.
Okay, we've covered the prototypes, the stories, and the essential investments. But this brings up a massive practical question for me.
What's that?
Let's talk to the listener who is commuting right now, listening to this and realizing, oh no, my implicit narrative is the horror story. Or I realize I am operating on the game script and it's destroying my marriage.
Yeah, that's a tough realization.
If our definitions of love are so heavily shaped by our early environment and culture, are we trapped? Can a person consciously edit their own implicit love story to build a better relationship?
That is the million-dollar question that drives the entire field of clinical psychology and couples therapy. And the consensus is a cautious but definitive optimism.
Okay, good.
Implicit scripts are incredibly powerful precisely because they operate below the level of conscious awareness.
Yeah.
You cannot fix a machine if you don't know it's broken. By dragging that implicit story into conscious awareness, by naming it, observing it, and acknowledging where it came from, you sever its automatic control over your behavior. You can absolutely rewrite the script, but it requires active, sustained cognitive effort.
But to track that effort, To know if a patient or a society is actually changing their definitions, scientists need tools. You can't track change without a ruler. How do researchers actually hand a participant a piece of paper and accurately measure an abstract emotion like love?
Well, the history of measuring love is actually quite fraught and occasionally unintentionally hilarious.
Oh, absolutely.
If we look at the early attempts, they reflect the societal biases of their time far more than any objective psychological truth.
I was reading through Gross's 1944 belief pattern scale for measuring attitudes toward romanticism, and my jaw dropped. This was treated as a valid scientific instrument.
It really was.
Let me read a couple of these items. Participants were asked to rate their agreement with statements like, "It is important to choose a handsome person with an attractive figure for a sweetheart."
It reads less like a psychometric scale and more like a cast recall for a 1940s Hollywood film.
It's wild. Here is another one. A girl should not expect her sweetheart to be chivalrous on all occasions.
Just unbelievable.
It is entirely gender normative, wildly subjective, and completely useless for understanding cognitive structure.
Thankfully, as the theoretical models matured in the 1980s, so did the methodology.
Right.
When Hendrick and Hendrick developed their 6 Greek love styles, they simultaneously created the love attitudes scale, the LAS, to measure them. This was a massive leap forward.
How did it work?
They developed highly specific statements to tap into each style. For example, to measure Storge, the friendship-based style, they asked participants to rate statements like, "Genuine love first requires caring for a while."
And Sternberg did the same thing. He created an inventory to diagnose which of the 26 stories you were operating on. If you strongly agreed with the statement, relationships need to be nourished constantly, you were pinged for the gardening story. Fair took her prototype features and built scales, asking people how closely their personal experience matched the central traits. But as I was reviewing the history of these measurements, a massive, glaring gap in the science became incredibly obvious.
The field possessed no standardized, universally accepted tool for measuring companionate love.
Yes. The irony is completely baffling. We just spent the entire first half of this deep dive establishing with hard cognitive data that companionate love, the trust, honesty, caring, and respect is the absolute universal prototype of love.
It is the operating system.
It is the apple. And yet for decades, researchers obsessed over building intricate scales to measure passionate romance, arrows, and butterflies, or completely failing to build a reliable ruler for the very foundation of human affection.
It is arguably one of the most remarkable blind spots in the history of relationship science. When researchers needed to measure companionate love, they essentially had to cobble things together.
What do they use?
They usually reach for the Storge subscale from the Hendricks Love Attitude Scale. But as meta-analyses have shown, particularly Masuda's work in 2003, the Storge scale is highly problematic.
Why? What makes it a bad ruler?
Because it doesn't cleanly isolate the emotion. Masuda's analysis revealed that the Storge scale behaves erratically across different studies.
Okay.
It frequently conflates a person's beliefs about how love should develop with their actual lived experiences within a relationship. It measures a specific friends-first temporal approach to dating rather than capturing the ongoing vital presence of trust and respect in a mature marriage.
Oh, I see.
It muddies the empirical waters.
So they were trying to measure the operating system, but using a ruler designed to measure how long the computer takes to boot up.
Yeah.
It's the wrong metric entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, researchers like Sprecher and Fair tried to plug this hole in 2005 by developing the Compassionate Love Scale.
Right, and that was a vital addition. But it's important to note the distinction. The Compassionate Love Scale measures a person's dispositional tendency toward altruism, their likelihood to experience selfless caring and sacrifice for others.
Right, the agape bucket.
It is an excellent tool for measuring the compassionate bucket. But the field still struggles with a unified, rock-solid instrument for standard, everyday companionate love between partners.
And this isn't just academic inside baseball. If we don't have a valid ruler for companionate love, the real-world consequences are severe.
How so?
Marriage counselors, sociologists tracking divorce rates, public health officials studying the impact of loneliness, they are all essentially flying blind. You cannot accurately diagnose why society's foundational relationships are crumbling if your diagnostic tools are broken.
Precisely. However, even with these imperfect tools, social psychologists have been able to conduct massive population-level demographic studies.
Yes.
And this leads us to what is perhaps the most culturally disruptive section of the research, the demographic breakdown of love.
It is time to systematically dismantle the Mars and Venus myth.
Let's do it.
The pervasive, deeply entrenched cultural narrative that men and women are fundamentally, biologically, and psychologically different species when it comes to experiencing love.
The stereotype is ubiquitous. Women are portrayed as the hyper-romantic, emotionally driven sex, dreaming of fairy tale weddings and prioritizing love above all else. Men are stereotyped as emotionally stoic, purely pragmatic, terrified of commitment, and driven solely by physical conquest.
Right.
We teased this at the beginning of the show, but the hard psychometric data doesn't just challenge this stereotype, it completely obliterates it.
It really does. Let's delve into the methodology of the Ackerman study from 2011 because it beautifully illustrates the gap between perception and reality.
Go ahead.
Ackerman and his colleagues executed a brilliant two-part design. In part one, they measured the cultural assumption. They surveyed the general public and asked a straightforward question. In a heterosexual romantic relationship, who normally falls in love and says, "I love you" first?
And the public response was a landslide. Nearly two-thirds of the participants confidently stated that women fall in love first. Almost 85% said that women are the ones who think about getting serious first.
Society is entirely convinced of the Mars and Venus divide.
But then in part two, Ackerman turned from cultural assumptions to empirical reality. He surveyed couples and asked them to reconstruct the actual timeline of their relationship. Who actually confessed their love first?
And the data flips entirely. Men express love first in 61.2% of the relationships. And as we mentioned earlier, when asked when they first started internally thinking about saying "I love you," the men were a full 42 days ahead of the women.
That is just wild.
This is not an isolated anomaly. When you look at broad psychometric testing utilizing the romantic belief scale, a very clear, highly replicated pattern emerges. Men consistently score significantly higher on measures of romantic idealism than women do.
Men are the ones who statistically agree with statements like, "True love overcomes all obstacles," or "There is only one true love out there for each person."
Yeah.
Men actually believe in love at first sight at much higher rates than women do. Men are the hopeless romantics.
And conversely, the data reveals that women approach romance with a much higher degree of pragmatism and realism. Women are statistically more likely to believe that socioeconomic resources, financial stability, career prospects matter significantly when evaluating a partner.
They are more likely to reject the notion of a soulmate, believing instead that a person can be perfectly happy with multiple different potential partners.
Right. And crucially, women score much higher on the Storage friendship-based love style.
We even see this play out in Sternberg's love stories. When you track which gender endorses which narrative, men are highly overrepresented in the art story, which prioritizes physical attractiveness.
Yes.
They endorse the sacrifice story, viewing love as a grand giving gesture. They endorse the science fiction story, literally viewing their partner as an incomprehensible alien being. And alarmingly, they score higher on the pornography story, which scripts love around degradation.
And which narrative do women predominantly endorse?
The travel story. The highly adaptive, highly practical script that views love as a shared journey requiring navigation, teamwork, and mutual effort.
So if we stop right here, we still have a massive gender divide.
We do.
We have a mountain of evidence showing that men are passionate, idealistic romantics, and women are grounded, practical realists. We've just swapped the planets. Men are from Venus, women are from Mars.
Right, but there is a crucial pivot in the research that synthesizes all of this.
The Farren-Broughton within gender analysis, this is the study that resolves the paradox completely.
Break down how a within-gender analysis differs from what we've been talking about and why it changes the conclusion so drastically.
Up until this point, all the data we discussed was based on between-gender comparisons. We were taking the average male score on passion and comparing it to the average female score.
Okay.
When you do that, men score slightly higher on passion and women score slightly higher on companionate pragmatism. But Farren-Broughton recognized that comparing the genders to each other hides their actual internal priorities.
It's like asking who likes cake more, men or women, without asking if either of them actually prefers pie.
Precisely. Great analogy. So instead of pitting men against women, they looked inside each gender separately.
Right.
They asked men, between passionate love and companionate love, which do you personally value and prioritize more? And they asked women the exact same internal question.
And when you look at the internal hierarchy, the differences instantly vanish. Both men and women, overwhelmingly and significantly, assign higher ratings to companionate love over passionate love.
When you look at the fundamental psychological architecture, both genders prioritize trust, honesty, caring, and friendship over fireworks and romantic idealism, the core human hardware is identical.
The Mars and Venus narrative is basically a funhouse mirror. It takes a very real but very tiny, nuanced statistical difference. The fact that men might be slightly more prone to visual passion or idealistic beliefs, and it works that tiny difference into a massive fictitious biological divide.
It sells millions of self-help books, but it isn't reality.
But we must ask why society got it so backward in the first place. Why did we assume women were the irrational romantics?
Evolutionary psychology offers a compelling hypothesis here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Historically and biologically, women bore an immensely heavy energetic and physical cost regarding childbirth and child-rearing. Because of that vulnerability, they could not afford to be blinded by fleeting passion.
Right, the stakes were too high.
Exactly. Evolutionary pressures demanded that women be highly pragmatic about resource security and select reliable, companionate partners who would stay and provide.
While men, who do not bear the physical vulnerability of pregnancy, had the evolutionary luxury of being swept away by immediate passion and visual triggers without the same survival risks.
Exactly. Over millennia, socialization layered on top of this biology. Society allowed women to express emotion more freely, which confused the expression of feeling with the nature of the feeling.
Oh, that makes sense.
We assumed that because women talked about love more, they must be the idealistic romantics. But beneath the cultural conditioning, the core human drive for deep, stable companionship supersedes gender entirely.
So if the gender divide is largely an illusion, what happens when we zoom out even further? What happens when we leave the university campuses of North America and look across the globe? Does culture fundamentally rewrite our definition of love?
To determine if the cognitive prototype of love is universal, the scientific method demands rigorous replication across diverse populations.
Okay.
FAIR conducted her initial prototype studies using university students on the west coast of Canada.
And it replicated flawlessly? Researchers Button and Collier ran the exact same tests on the east coast of Canada and got the exact same prototype.
Yes.
Luby and Aaron took the methodology to the United States. And importantly, they didn't just test 19-year-old undergrads. They tested older adults in community music appreciation classes.
Right.
Across all these diverse North American demographics, the same 5 features remained universally paramount: trust, caring, honesty, friendship, and respect.
But critics correctly pointed out that North America is a relatively homogeneous cultural and media bloc. To prove universality, you have to cross language and cultural barriers.
So it went to Europe.
Lamb and Wiseman translated the studies and executed them in Germany. The results were identical. The core indicators of love in Germany were positive mood, trust, and altruism.
Klein and colleagues took it a step further and compared Asian university students with American students. They wanted to see if Eastern collectivist cultures viewed love differently than Western individualist cultures.
And what did they find?
Well, while there are nuances in how love is expressed, the core prototype held firm. Both Asian and American students overwhelmingly prioritized trust, respect, and caring over passionate concepts when defining love within a marriage.
It is incredibly validating for the prototype approach. But to truly appreciate the intersection of universal biology and cultural influence, we have to examine Philip Shaver's landmark work on the emotion lexicon.
Oh, this study is fascinating.
Shaver wanted to map the actual linguistic structure of emotion, comparing the United States with Indonesia.
This study is fascinating because it proves that we are all running the same operating system, but we have different cultural software installed.
Shaver found that at the superordinate level, the absolute highest, broadest category of human feeling, which is simply dividing emotions into positive versus negative, the linguistic structure of the US and Indonesia are identical.
Okay.
Moving down to the basic level, the fundamental category of love exists universally in both languages.
But when you drill down to the subordinate level, the highly fine-grained, detailed subcategories that describe the specific flavors of love, that is where the cultures radically diverge.
How so?
The United States lexicon contains 16 distinct subcategories of love, but the Indonesian lexicon contains 26.
And it's not just that they have more words. The words describe a different focal point of the emotional experience. The Indonesian concept of love explicitly includes entire subcategories dedicated to feelings of yearning and longing.
Which makes perfect sense when you dive into the cultural psychology. If a culture places heavy emphasis on the pain of separation or the longing for unity, their language evolves to capture that nuance. They literally possess a higher resolution vocabulary for that specific aspect of love than Americans do.
To use your analogy, the universal prototype of trust and caring is the hardware. Every human brain possesses it.
Right.
But culture provides a localized software update. It adds unique vocabulary, subtle shifts in emotional emphasis, and dictates how the emotion is properly expressed in public.
This cultural data brings up a really provocative thought. If the core prototype of love is practically identical in Tokyo, Berlin, and California, if humans universally subconsciously know that love means trust and companionate care, doesn't that mean the modern Western obsession with passionate romance is a massive anomaly?
It strongly suggests that our cultural media is operating in direct opposition to our psychological needs.
Exactly. Our movies, our pop songs, our reality TV shows, they are constantly force-feeding us a version of love built entirely on fireworks, drama, and infatuation. We are essentially mass marketing the non-prototypical avocado while the human brain is desperately starving for the apple.
Which perfectly sets up the final and arguably most crucial application of all this data.
The so what?
Yes, we know what love is conceptually. We know how it is categorized, how it is measured, and that its core is universally companionate. But the ultimate so what is how these abstract definitions dictate the actual success or failure of the relationships in your life.
Kelly, a prominent researcher, put it perfectly back in 1983. He stated that people's conceptions of love directly influence whether they initiate, maintain, or end their relationships. Your internal definition of love is the steering wheel of your romantic life. So let's look at the data on what actually predicts satisfaction in a relationship.
The data on satisfaction presents a fascinating, almost contradictory picture initially. When researchers administer the love attitude scale to couples, Eros, the passionate romantic love style, is strongly and consistently linked to high relationship satisfaction.
Agape, the altruistic selfless style, is also heavily linked to satisfaction, particularly for female partners.
Yes.
Furthermore, endorsing adaptive narrative scripts, like The Gardening Story, correlates with long-term happiness. But here is the massive paradox that confused researchers for years. The storage scale, the specific metric designed to measure companionate, friendship-based love, shows almost no statistical relation to relationship satisfaction.
At first glance, that finding seems to invalidate everything we've discussed today. If companionate love is a universal prototype, why doesn't scoring high on the companionate scale predict happiness?
But as we discussed in the measurement section, the storage scale is a broken ruler.
Precisely.
It isn't measuring the ongoing presence of trust and respect. It's measuring whether you prefer to be platonic friends with someone for a year before dating them. The lack of correlation isn't proof that companionate love doesn't matter. It's proof that the survey is flawed.
Exactly. To see the true, undeniable power of companionate love, you cannot just look at what makes people satisfied on a random Tuesday. You have to look at what causes relationships to undergo catastrophic failure. You have to look at dissolution.
Let's look at Simpson's data from the 1980s. He surveyed populations and asked a very blunt question. Is the loss of love valid grounds for ending a marriage?
And overwhelmingly in Western cultures, people said yes. If the love is gone, the marriage should end. Though it is worth noting that Levine found this belief to be slightly less prevalent in Eastern collectivist cultures, where concepts of family duty and social cohesion often outweigh individual romantic fulfillment.
But Simpson's question was too broad. The critical surgical question is, the loss of which kind of love leads to divorce? Beverly Fair designed a brilliant scenario study in 1988 to test exactly this mechanism.
Break down how a scenario study works for the listener.
In a scenario study, you don't ask people about their abstract beliefs. You present them with highly specific hypothetical vignettes and ask them to predict the outcome. Fair gave participants different scenarios describing a marriage where a specific type of relationship violation had occurred.
Okay.
In one set of scenarios, the passionate features of love were violated. The couple was no longer sexually attracted to each other, the butterflies were gone, the physical intimacy had faded.
And in the other set of scenarios, the companionate features were violated. There was a profound breach of trust, a loss of mutual respect, or a failure of basic honesty.
The results were definitive. Participants viewed violations of the companionate features as apocalyptic. A failure of trust or respect was seen as completely destroying the relationship, making dissolution inevitable.
However, the loss of passionate features was viewed as unfortunate but manageable. It was not seen as an automatic death sentence for the marriage.
Sprecher and Toromorn confirmed this exact dynamic in later studies. They found that Americans simply do not view the fading of passion as valid grounds for divorce, provided that the companionate love remains high.
Exactly.
If the fireworks fade after 10 years, but my partner is still my fiercely loyal, honest, caring best friend, I am not going to blow up my family and file for divorce.
If we synthesize all of this data, a very clear behavioral mechanism emerges. Passion acts as the catalyst. It is the biological bait.
Right.
It grabs our attention, draws us toward a specific person, and provides the immediate, intense satisfaction required to initiate the bond. But companionate love is the structural integrity that sustains it. We are attracted by passion, but we divorced over the loss of companionship.
I want to try a different analogy here to lock this concept in. Let's think about the human immune system.
Okay, I'm listening.
Passion is the initial exposure.
Yeah.
It's the virus that gets into your system, spikes your temperature, makes your heart race, and completely alters your physiological state. It's intense and undeniable.
Right.
But companionate love, the trust, the honesty, the deep mutual care, that is your adaptive immune response. It is the complex, deeply embedded biological system that learns the specific contours of the threat, adapts to it, and ultimately keeps you alive and stable over the long term.
That is a phenomenal biological metaphor.
If you just have the fever of passion without the immune system of companionate care, the organism eventually burns out and dies.
The passion initiates the systemic change, but the companion and infrastructure guarantees long-term survival. And when partners possess fundamentally misaligned definitions of these systems, if one partner is chasing the fever and the other is trying to build the immune response, the relationship is doomed to catastrophic miscommunication.
Let's briefly retrace this massive journey we've been on for the listener.
Sounds good.
We started by looking at how humanity treated love like alchemy, a mystical, poetic mystery. Then, the social psychologists brought the rigor of chemistry, defining the variables and attempting to build tidy taxonomic spreadsheets of passion and companionship.
We saw how those rigid academic models collapsed under statistical scrutiny, leading us to Eleanor Rosch and Beverly Fair's prototype approach.
Right, the apples and avocados.
This cognitive breakthrough proved empirically that everyday people process companionate traits, trust, honesty, and caring as the universal, absolute core of love, while passionate romance is relegated to the periphery.
We took a sledgehammer to the Mars and Venus myth, proving that men are actually the statistical romantics, but that underneath the cultural conditioning, both genders prioritize deep companionship.
We saw that this fundamental prototype is universal from California to Germany to Asia, even as languages like Indonesian add beautiful localized subcategories for concepts like yearning.
And finally, we learned that our subconscious narrative scripts, our love stories, alongside our absolute requirement for that companionate foundation, ultimately dictate our relational survival. Passion gets you in the door. Companionate love keeps the structure standing.
But before we sign off, there is one final, deeply provocative concept hidden in this research that I think we need to address. It builds on everything we've just discussed, specifically looking at Burscheid's fourth category of love from her quadrumvirate model, attachment love.
The deep bond forged when we seek safety and security from environmental threats.
Exactly. The literature theorizes that attachment love might be uniquely, almost dangerously strong in highly individualistic, modern Western cultures. And the underlying reason is incredibly sobering.
Tell me more.
In our modern society, we have largely dismantled the extended family. We have moved away from tight-knit, geographically stable communities.
Right.
Because of this intense societal isolation, romantic partners are now frequently forced to serve as our primary and sometimes our only attachment figures.
The psychological implications of that shift are staggering.
Yeah.
Throughout human history, the emotional load of an individual was distributed. You derived your companionate love from lifelong friends and siblings. You derived your compassionate love from your broader community. You derived your attachment security from a wide network of elders and family members. Your romantic partner was primarily responsible for passion and localized partnership.
But today, we look at our spouse and we demand that they be everything. We require one single human being to fulfill our need for dizzying passion, our need for perfect companionate friendship, our need for altruistic compassion, and we demand that they serve as our sole psychological safe haven against the terrors of the world.
We're asking one person to execute the emotional labor that used to be distributed across an entire village.
And so the provocation I want to leave the listener with is this. By demanding that one single person successfully run all four of these massive emotional operating systems simultaneously, are we setting our implicit love stories up for an inevitable, tragic ending.
Wow.
No matter how strong the companionate foundation is, can any one human being support the weight of an entire village?
It is a profound structural question about the viability of modern romance. It demands that we look outward and rebuild our communal networks rather than continually turning inward and putting impossible pressure on our spouses.
Exactly.
That is a heavy, necessary framework to carry with you this week. As you move through your daily life, I encourage you to actively evaluate the prototype you are applying to the people you love. Are you nurturing the core operating system of trust and care, or are you just obsessing over the flashy user interface of passion? And most importantly, are you asking one person to be your entire village? Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Take care of your foundations, and we'll see you next time.